General Alicia Grant stood tall, the weight of her uniform a testament to decades of unwavering service. The sunlight caught the sharp lines of her military jacket, the polished insignia reflecting years of sacrifice and command. Her black SUV, unmistakably official, was parked neatly at the checkpoint. But to Officer Mark Hayes, the sight didn't add up. His eyes narrowed, not from the brightness of the day, but from a gnawing suspicion rooted deep within assumptions he barely understood himself. Hayes approached silently, his steps heavy with authority and doubt. "Whose vehicle is this?" he demanded, voice low but edged with accusation. Alicia turned, calm and unshaken, meeting his gaze with quiet confidence. "It's mine," she said simply. But Hayes wasn't convinced. The uniform, the car, none of it matched the picture in his head. No proper verification, no second glance beyond the surface. Without hesitation, Hayes ordered her to produce identification. Alicia complied, revealing a military ID unlike any he had seen. A thick card embossed with seals and encrypted codes. His suspicion only deepened. "Borrowed someone's ride?" he sneered, his tone dripping with contempt, veiling the prejudice that clouded his judgment. The assumption was clear. A black woman in uniform? Impossible. An imposter. Before Alicia could respond, the gleam of silver handcuffs caught the light, a chilling promise of the humiliation to come. With a metallic click, her wrists were bound, not because of proof, but because of prejudice. The crowd nearby held their breath, silent witnesses to a moment where justice faltered and dignity was nearly crushed. Yet, Alicia's face betrayed nothing. Not fear, not anger, only an unyielding resolve. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about a system quick to judge, slow to see, and too eager to act on the weight of skin color rather than truth. The story was just beginning. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit lightly into General Alicia Grant's wrists, a stark contrast to the fire burning quietly in her eyes. She was no stranger to pressure, to moments where every decision mattered. Lives depended on her steadiness. Yet, here she was, shackled and paraded like a common suspect, reduced not by rank or achievement but by the blind weight of assumption that Alicia's lips remained pressed in a firm line, her posture unbroken, even as Officer Mark Hayes led her toward the patrol car. The heated asphalt beneath their feet did little to warm the chill that spread through the charged air. Bystanders whispered behind clenched jaws, their gazes flickering between curiosity and discomfort. But Alicia's silence was deafening. It spoke volumes where words failed. Inside the cramped patrol car, the plastic seats pressed against her back, but she refused to slump or show weakness. Hayes' grip on her arm was firm, an unspoken assertion of control, yet she met it with unyielding calm. No handcuff marks marred her dignity. No sign of resistance, only the quiet refusal to surrender to injustice. Minutes crawled like hours. Alicia's mind was sharp beneath the stillness. She understood the gravity of what was unfolding, not just for herself but for every soldier who donned the uniform with honor, every person judged by the color of their skin rather than their character. Her silence was deliberate, a shield and a sword. Then came the request that shifted the atmosphere. A simple, steady voice asking for a phone call. Not to a lawyer, not to a loved one, but to the highest echelon of command. Hayes smirked, half mocking, half dismissive. "Going to call your lawyer?" he sneered, expecting compliance or defiance. Alicia's reply was measured, resolute. "No, I'm calling the Department of Defense." The words hung in the stale air like a challenge. Hayes glanced at the landline on the dashboard, its frayed cord and worn buttons betraying its ordinary facade. But Alicia's connection was anything but ordinary as she dialed. Each tone reverberated like a countdown. No names, no locations, just a code, a short, precise sequence reserved for moments when ordinary procedures cease and the weight of national security presses down. The call triggered a cascade, a ripple that spread through corridors unseen, from secure command centers to the offices where decisions were made in hushed tones. Inside the precinct, tension thickened. Officers exchanged uncertain looks, their previous certainty unraveling. Hayes stood stiff, his usual bravado faltering under the invisible gaze of power far beyond his reach. The call lasted just 17 seconds, brief but seismic. On the other end, the voice was calm, authoritative, devoid of panic or anger. Acknowledged, we will handle it. The phrase was not a promise of rescue but a protocol enacted, a signal that the system recognized its own and demanded swift correction. Back in the patrol car, Alicia was uncuffed quietly, without ceremony. Yet, her freedom was measured, not by the absence of chains, but by the realization that she had moved into a space no one in this room understood. No longer a suspect, yet still trapped in the liminal zone between authority and oppression. Hayes retreated to paperwork, shuffling through forms meant to justify his actions, but each document felt increasingly hollow. The hum of the precinct was subdued, every sound stretched thin under the weight of an unspoken reckoning. Outside the glass walls, the world continued, unaware of the upheaval inside. But for Alicia, every second was a reminder that justice was fragile. A dance of power, perception, and the courage to stand still when the world demanded noise. Her calm was not weakness. It was a statement that I end the waiting room. She sat with hands resting softly on her lap, wrists still bearing the faint redness of restraint. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sterile shadows. Around her, officers whispered theories, questioned procedures, and for the first time, doubted their own roles. A young girl, no older than 9, stood nearby holding a tablet, recording silently. Her wide eyes captured not just images but the raw emotion of the moment. Confusion, awe, a quiet kind of hope. This small witness knew nothing of military ranks or legal jargon. She only knew the woman before her was unshaken. The call had done more than secure Alicia's release. It had exposed a fault line, a fracture in the facade of order. The protocol was a reminder that some protections were hard-earned, guarded by layers few understood, and respected even fewer. Hayes was left with the taste of defeat, not from confrontation, but from the realization that he had reached beyond his grasp. The confidence in his step faded as the implications settled in. This was no longer a simple traffic stop. It was a moment of reckoning. Alicia's voice broke the silence only once more. Calm, but carrying the weight of countless battles fought and survived. Have you ever considered that you arrested the wrong person? Hayes said nothing. The room held its breath. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the precinct steps. Shadows that stretched beyond the walls, touching the very foundations of a system forced to look within it in that silence. The real story was beginning. The phone line crackled faintly in the dimly lit room as the call from General Alicia Grant reached the highest corridors of power. The code she uttered, Tango Echo 15, was more than just a sequence of words. It was a key that unlocked doors few dared to approach. Within seconds, an invisible storm was set in motion. The Pentagon's Strategic Operations Center. Screens flickered to life, displaying Alicia's credentials with an unmistakable clarity. The security clearance level Alpha Prime wasn't just rare, it was almost mythical. It signaled authority, trust, and the weight of countless missions carried out under the harshest conditions. The directive was swift and absolute. Release General Grant immediately. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Officer Mark Hayes, who had approached this encounter with suspicion and certainty, now felt the ground give way beneath him. The hum of the station seemed to dim, voices faltered, and eyes turned nervously toward the waiting room where Alicia remained. No longer a detainee, but a symbol of a grave mistake. Hayes sat frozen, the air thick with tension as the chain of command sent down an unambiguous order. The dispatch was clear. Cease all proceedings and release the individual named Alicia Grant without delay. The message was delivered with a cold finality that brooked no argument. Around him, officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some shuffled paperwork hastily, others averted their eyes, as if hoping the moment would pass unnoticed. But it couldn't. The reality was undeniable. They had wrongfully detained one of the nation's most respected military leaders. The precinct chief arrived quietly, his presence commanding yet subdued. He surveyed the scene with a heavy gaze before addressing Hayes directly, his voice low but firm. "Are you certain the person you detained is an impersonator?" Hayes could only manage a silence. The weight of that question pressed down on him harder than any badge or gun. It wasn't just a matter of protocol anymore. It was a confrontation with his own errors and the biases that had driven them. Meanwhile, Alicia sat composed, her expression unreadable but resolute. The faint redness on her wrists from the cuffs was a stark contrast to the unwavering strength in her eyes. She had seen battles where the stakes were life and death, but this ordeal, being doubted, restrained, and humiliated by those sworn to uphold justice, cut deeper in ways no battlefield could. When the order came for her release, it was executed with a mix of haste and hesitation. The handcuffs were removed quietly, the symbolic chains falling away to reveal not a suspect, but a general who had never once faltered in duty. Yet no apology was offered, no formal recognition of the grave misstep. Officer Hayes watched as Alicia stood, adjusted her uniform and nodded gently, an acknowledgement not of victory, but of the endurance required to weather injustice. Her presence alone seemed to fill the room, commanding respect not through words, but through the undeniable truth of who she was. The precinct's walls, once a fortress of law and order, now echoed with the silent admission of failure. Officers whispered about protocols overlooked, assumptions made, and a system unprepared to recognize authority when it stood face to face. Outside, news began to trickle in. Social media buzzed with videos and accounts of the arrest, sparking outrage and disbelief. The public grappled with the image of a decorated general handcuffed and detained by local police, an image that shattered illusions about fairness and equality. Inside the precinct, investigations were quietly launched. Hayes found himself at the center, the scrutiny intense and unrelenting. Records were pulled, past incidents reviewed, revealing patterns of behavior and implicit biases that had long gone unchecked. The initial certainty Hayes had clung to eroded, replaced by a growing awareness of the damage caused, not just to Alicia, but to the very fabric of trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. In a rare moment of solitude, Hayes reflected on the chain of decisions, the snap judgments, and the unspoken prejudices that had led to this moment. The weight of responsibility settled on him like a crushing burden. Meanwhile, Alicia Grant's ordeal became more than a story of a wrongful arrest. It became a catalyst, a mirror held up to a system in desperate need of reform. Her silence, dignity, and the swift intervention of the Pentagon revealed cracks in the foundations of authority, justice, and respect. The revelation stunned not only those in the precinct but rippled outward, challenging assumptions, igniting conversations, and forcing institutions to confront uncomfortable truths. The swift, decisive action from the Department of Defense was a stark reminder that real authority carries with it accountability, and that failing to recognize it can bring the mightiest systems to a halt. As Alicia walked away from the precinct that day, unescorted but unmistakably commanding, the world watched. some with admiration, others with shame. The general had been vindicated, but the questions lingered. How many others had been judged unfairly? How deep did the roots of bias run? And how would the system change to prevent such a miscarriage of justice from happening again? The answer was uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was no ordinary day at the precinct. It was a turning point, where silence was broken, power was challenged, and the fight for justice gained a new, unwavering champion. The story was far from over. General Alicia Grant stepped out of the precinct with the quiet grace of a warrior who had weathered countless storms. No escort flanked her. No official apologies murmured through the halls. Yet, the silence that followed her was louder than any proclamation. Her presence alone demanded respect, an unspoken acknowledgement that what had transpired was not just a mistake, but a rupture in the very fabric of justice. Officers and staff lingered in hushed conversations, casting furtive glances toward the exit she had passed through. The air was thick with unease, a collective reckoning dawning too late. Alicia's dignified composure stood in stark contrast to the chaos that her wrongful detention had ignited within the department. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Hayes found himself thrust into a relentless internal storm. The initial shock of the Pentagon's intervention soon gave way to a grueling examination of his conduct. Investigators pored over files, body cam footage, and reports spanning years, uncovering a troubling pattern. Time and again, Hayes had disproportionately targeted minorities, his decisions steeped in bias and unchecked authority. Each incident peeled back another layer of systemic failure, a record of complaints dismissed, reviews glossed over, and accountability avoided. Hayes' past misconduct was no longer an isolated shadow. It was a glaring thread woven into the department's fabric. The mounting evidence led swiftly to administrative suspension, a clear message that no officer stood above scrutiny. The suspension was more than punitive. It was a symbol, a necessary step toward confronting the prejudices entrenched within the force. Hayes, once a figure of confidence and control, now faced the stark reality of a system beginning to challenge its own darkest corners. But the ripples extended beyond one man. The police department found itself under a microscope, compelled to face uncomfortable truths about implicit biases and the culture that had allowed them to flourish. Trainings were reevaluated, protocols revised, and leadership called to answer for the failings exposed by Alicia's ordeal. Parallel to this, the military community rallied quietly but firmly. Veterans, officers, and soldiers shared stories of Alicia's unwavering leadership, moments when her courage had saved lives, when her calm had steadied chaos. Their voices amplified the call for systemic change, demanding recognition not just of her rank, but of the dignity owed to every service member, regardless of skin color. Discussions erupted in internal forums and public spheres alike, focusing on accountability and the urgent need to dismantle prejudice frameworks. The Maddox effect, as it came to be known, inspired a movement within both institutions, a commitment to root out silent complicity and foster environments where respect was not optional but foundational. The fallout was neither quiet nor simple. It ignited debates about power, privilege, and the responsibility of those sworn to protect. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a shared resolve emerged. A resolve that justice must be blind not only in theory but in practice, that authority must be tempered with humility, and that dignity cannot be negotiable. Officer Hayes, isolated by his actions, became a cautionary emblem, a reminder of what happens when prejudice goes unchecked. His suspension sent shockwaves through the ranks, prompting many to question not only individual behaviors but the structures that enabled them. For Alicia, the ordeal was both painful and transformative. She chose silence over spectacle, allowing her unwavering strength to speak louder than words. Her journey forced the system to look inward, igniting change that reverberated far beyond a single arrest. The precinct's walls, once thick with certainty, now echoed with reflection and a cautious hope for reform. The military and law enforcement communities found themselves at a crossroads, one path leading to denial and stagnation, the other to accountability and growth. As days turned into weeks, policies shifted. Implicit bias training became mandatory. Reporting mechanisms for misconduct were strengthened. Dialogue opened between civilian law enforcement and military leadership, fostering understanding where suspicion had once ruled. The story of General Alicia Grant and Officer Hayes became a pivotal chapter, a narrative of power challenged, justice questioned, and a system compelled to evolve. It was a testament to the courage required not just on battlefields, but within the corridors of authority. In the end, the silence that followed Alicia's release was not emptiness, but a space filled with awakening, a collective breath before the hard work of change began. The battle for justice was far from over, but now it was fought with eyes wide open. The moment the video of General Alicia Grant's arrest hit the internet, it exploded like wildfire. Thousands watched in disbelief as a high-ranking military leader, clad in the uniform of honor and sacrifice, was cuffed and treated like a common criminal. The footage, raw and unfiltered, showed not only the cold metal encircling her wrists, but also the chilling indifference in Officer Hayes' eyes. A look that spoke volumes about assumptions and prejudice. Comments poured in from every corner, a tide of outrage swelling with every share and replay. Social media became a battleground overnight. Hashtags demanding justice for Alicia trended worldwide. People of all backgrounds, veterans who'd served beside her, students inspired by her story, civilians outraged by injustice, united in a chorus of solidarity. They shared personal accounts of Alicia's valor, how she had led soldiers through the chaos of war zones, saved lives with quiet resolve, and earned the respect of those who'd witnessed her courage firsthand. Her silence in the face of wrongful treatment only amplified their admiration. It was a testament to the strength it takes to remain composed when the world turns against you. On college campuses, discussion panels sprang up. Students dissected the incident, debating the deeper implications of racial bias in law enforcement and the invisible barriers that still haunt even the most decorated heroes. Veterans organizations organized rallies, holding black and white portraits of Alicia with banners that read, "Respect the uniform, respect the woman." The media spotlight sharpened, forcing local police departments and military institutions to respond. The pressure was relentless. National news outlets broadcast the story repeatedly, analyzing every frame of the arrest, every word exchanged, and every look past. Talk shows erupted into fierce debates about systemic racism, procedural failures, and the dangerous consequences of implicit bias. Opinions clashed. Some defended law enforcement procedures, citing protocol and the need for caution. Others condemned the prejudice so blatant it had arrested a general. The nation grappled with discomforting truths that many had long ignored. But this incident was more than a scandal. It was a catalyst. Police departments across the country felt the weight of public scrutiny. Internal reviews accelerated. Training programs, once cursory and superficial, were overhauled to include mandatory sessions on implicit bias, cultural competency, and respect for authority in all its forms. Officers were trained to recognize the limits of their perception and the dangers of assumptions based on skin color or appearance. Within military circles, Alicia's ordeal sparked conversations about the delicate relationship between civilian law enforcement and the armed forces. Commanders emphasized the importance of mutual respect and understanding, pushing for clearer protocols to protect service members from similar injustices. Military academies incorporated the story into their ethics curriculum, highlighting how courage and leadership extend beyond the battlefield and into everyday encounters. Communities affected by racial profiling saw in Alicia's story a mirror of their own experiences. Activists harnessed the momentum, demanding policy reforms and accountability measures. The incident became a rallying point, inspiring a new wave of advocacy focused on dismantling systemic prejudice within law enforcement agencies. Yet, amidst the roar of outrage, there was tension, fear of backlash, concern for escalation, uncertainty about real change. Some officers felt attacked, defensive, unwilling to confront uncomfortable truths. But the growing chorus of voices calling for justice and dignity was impossible to silence. The viral videos, the heartfelt testimonies, the protests and petitions, all converged to create a tipping point. Public officials pledged action. Independent oversight committees were established. Transparency in law enforcement practices improved, with body cameras and complaint review boards gaining greater authority and visibility. For Alicia Grant, the public reaction was bittersweet. She had not sought the spotlight, never desired to become a symbol, but she understood the power her story held, the power to awaken, to challenge, to transform. Through her silence, she had ignited a movement as the dust settled. The changes that followed were subtle yet profound. Training manuals evolved, officers approached their duties with renewed awareness, and communities began rebuilding fractured trust. The incident was etched into the national consciousness, a stark reminder that respect and justice must be earned and upheld by all, regardless of rank, race, or circumstance. The ripple effect of Alicia's wrongful arrest was undeniable. It cracked open the facade of impartiality that too often masked prejudice, forcing society to confront the uncomfortable reality that even those who serve with honor are not immune to bias. And in that confrontation lay hope, the hope that the system, once broken, could be rebuilt on the foundations of fairness, dignity, and true respect. The story was far from over, but now it was a story shared, learned from, and, most importantly, acted upon. The fight for justice had found a new champion, and a nation watching, waiting, and demanding better in the quiet aftermath of the storm. A phrase began to ripple through the halls of law enforcement academies, military briefing rooms, and community forums alike: the Maddox effect. Named after General Alicia Grant's ordeal, though she never sought the spotlight, the term captured something far deeper than a single incident. It was the power of one person's silent strength to make an entire system pause, reflect, and confront the truth it had long ignored. The Maddox effect wasn't about loud protests or angry speeches. It was about the stillness in Alicia's eyes as she stood handcuffed, refusing to be broken by chains of prejudice. It was the dignity in her silence, speaking louder than words ever could, reminding everyone watching that justice isn't just about procedure. It's about humanity. Training programs across the country began weaving this lesson into their core curriculum. Gone were the days when situational awareness meant nothing more than pattern recognition or ticking checkboxes. Now it demanded a deeper understanding, a conscious pause to look beyond skin color, rank, or attire, to challenge assumptions ingrained by habit and bias. Officers were taught that their first instinct wasn't always right, that respect must be given before suspicion, and that silence from others is never consent. Within police precincts and military bases, the Maddox effect became a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths. Conversations once whispered behind closed doors emerged into the light. Discussions about implicit bias, unchecked authority, and the quiet complicity that allowed injustice to fester. It was painful, raw, and necessary. No one wanted to admit how often silence had been the enemy of justice. Many officers, veterans, and trainees found themselves wrestling with their own pasts. Moments when they looked away, when they let prejudice cloud their judgment, when they failed to speak up. The weight of collective responsibility settled heavy on shoulders once unburdened by doubt. At times, tears came, not from anger, but from a profound sorrow, for the lives impacted by systemic prejudice, for the trust broken between protectors and the protected, for the courage it takes to stand firm, even when the world turns against you. Alicia's silent strength had become a beacon, illuminating paths toward redemption and reform. Military commanders revisited the stories of soldiers like Alicia, those who had never asked for privilege, who led with integrity, and whose very presence challenged the status quo. Their legacies became lessons in empathy and justice, reminding new generations that leadership is measured not by medals alone, but by respect for every human being. Police departments instituted internal reforms that went beyond policies, cultivating cultures where questioning bias was not just allowed, but expected. Accountability was no longer a distant ideal, but a daily practice. Officers were encouraged to speak up when they saw injustice, to listen when others remained silent, and to remember that every decision carries the weight of a life. Communities, once fractured by fear and mistrust, began rebuilding bridges. The Maddox effect inspired dialogues where pain was acknowledged and healing began. It was not an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. A collective commitment to ensure that no one, regardless of rank or race, would ever again be handcuffed by prejudice. In quiet moments, those who had been touched by the story would recall Alicia's gaze, the unwavering, unyielding look of a woman who refused to bow. It was a gaze that stripped away illusions and demanded truth. A gaze that reminded them all, justice is not a badge worn or a uniform donned. It is the courage to stand tall, even when bound. The Maddox effect became more than a term. It became a movement of conscience. Call to action. A solemn promise that the silence which once allowed injustice to thrive would no longer be tolerated. And somewhere, far from the spotlight, Alicia Grant remained silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because her story had already spoken volumes. Her strength had rewritten the narrative. Her presence had ignited change. The tears shed, the voices raised, and the hearts opened. These were the echoes of her courage. The Maddox effect would live on, a reminder that one person's quiet dignity can awaken an entire system, and that true justice begins when we dare to listen beyond the silence. The fallout was swift and unrelenting. Officer Mark Hayes, once confident and unquestioned in his authority, found himself unraveling under the weight of public scrutiny and institutional rebuke. His reputation, built on years of service, collapsed like a house of cards. Colleagues who once greeted him with nods of respect now avoided eye contact, whispers trailing behind him like shadows. Social and professional isolation became his new reality, a stark reminder that authority is not a shield against accountability. Hayes' suspension was more than a disciplinary action. It was a reckoning. As investigations peeled back layers of past misconduct, a painful narrative emerged, one that exposed not just a flawed individual, but a system that had enabled silence, bias, and unchecked power. His story became a cautionary tale about the consequences of prejudice and the urgent need for self-reflection within institutions entrusted with justice. Meanwhile, across the nation's military leadership, voices of support for General Alicia Grant grew louder and more resolute. Senior commanders, many of whom had served alongside her in the harshest theaters of war, stepped forward publicly, endorsing her integrity and leadership. Their endorsements were not mere formalities. They were powerful statements challenging the systemic failures laid bare by the incident. General Alicia's ordeal had transcended personal injustice. It had become a mirror reflecting the imperfections of institutions revered for discipline and honor. These leaders used the moment to call for a profound reassessment of protocols, training, and culture. They emphasized that respect and dignity are the bedrock of effective leadership and that no one, regardless of rank or race, should be subject to the arbitrary judgments born of prejudice. From classrooms to command centers, the story of Alicia Grant inspired reflection and education. It became a vital case study in leadership courses, ethics seminars, and diversity training programs. The lessons were clear and compelling. True courage is often silent but unwavering. Dignity in the face of adversity commands more power than any badge, and a single decisive action, whether a phone call or a refusal to yield, can shake the foundations of entrenched injustice. For the wider public, Alicia's story was a beacon of hope and a call to vigilance. It reminded us all that systems are only as just as the people who operate them, and that change begins when we challenge complacency and confront uncomfortable truths. It urged a collective commitment to fairness, accountability, and empathy as we reflect on this journey. Let Alicia Grant's example guide us. Let her silence teach us the strength in dignity. Let her courage inspire us to stand firm against injustice, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. And let the Maddox effect remind us that progress is born not just from grand gestures, but from the steadfast resolve of one individual willing to hold the line. If you found this story moving and meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that shed light on courage, justice, and change. Together, we can explore stories that challenge, inspire, and empower. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey toward a more just and compassionate world. Thank you for watching, and remember, True strength lies in standing tall, even when the world tries to bring you down.